Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we have tank changes, big tank nerfs coming in War Within beta. We've also got patch notes, so we'll just do the big video, do all the patch notes as well, so if you're not interested in the tank stuff, you've already heard about it, you can use the chapters at the bottom to skip ahead. So here are the tank changes. With the introduction of the Dragonflight talent system and season-over-season changes, tanks in World of Warcraft have become extremely durable relative to non-tank characters. Now right away, I would dispute this sentence. I believe that the durability of non-tank characters has gone up faster than the durability of tank characters. In particular, the amount of defensives that the average DPS and healer spec has. There are some outliers that don't have as many, but that has skyrocketed. Whereas tank durability compared to, say, Shadowlands Season 3, Shadowlands Season 4, BFA Season 4, BFA Season 3. Tanks were indestructible in those seasons, which is kind of the point that they've sort of reached. I mean, kind of Vengeance Demon Hunter in Seasons 3 and 4 of Dragonflight, and Bear in Season 2 of Dragonflight reached that level of durability. In both cases, because they had interactions in M+, that scaled their defenses with the amount of targets they were fighting. Like, that was the primary offender in making those tank specs extremely durable in those cases. But I would very much describe this as a lie. Their active defenses can mitigate high percentages of incoming damage, and they have strong self-healing. Today, in the hardest content in the game, many tanks can sustain themselves without much assistance from healers. Again, this is mostly true, largely for the specs that can do it because they are scaling nicely with the amount of incoming either damage or targets that they are fighting. But again, I would dispute that this is a change from the status quo in previous seasons, except for seasons like Shadowlands Season 1, where it certainly wasn't true. In some cases, we've seen it become optimal to do group content without a healer at all. Now, this is a true criticism that can be leveled at certain parts of the game. There are some cases in M+, where you'd play without a healer, but it's like very sweaty groups that would do that. You'll see if you look at Raider.io, you'll see a lot of groups without a healer, but that's usually like, oh, we're going to do the first few pulls without a healer because we know we can do those pulls, and then we're going to swap out. And the thing that has changed from previous expansions there isn't that the tanks don't need the healer, it's that the DPS don't need the healer. And in fact, the healer doesn't even help the DPS, really. Like, if you're going to go do some M+ keys, and you're going to do like a 17 keystone, whether your DPS player lives or dies is not based on the healer. It's based on whether they press their defensives. And that is the reason that you then, if you have those DPS players that can press their defensives, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I guess we don't need a healer. I would say that the tank side of this is very much not the actual issue. World of Warcraft is an MMO, and its multiplayer aspects are a major strength. Group content is extremely rewarding when players performing different roles come together to overcome a challenge. We want to reinforce the importance of the healer role and work towards gameplay where tanks and healers collaborate to reduce the damage the tank is taking and to restore the tank's lost health. So I agree with it's good when all the roles are important and different and needed. I personally disagree with the premise that the healer and the tank are like a two-person team that is working on keeping the tank alive, and then the DPS are a three-person team doing damage. I think that if it's, the healer kind of keeping everybody alive, which mostly means focusing not on the tank, and then sometimes helping the tank in periods of heavy tank damage, particularly if the tank has a dot, I think is a really natural time for the healer to be involved and kind of be aware that they need to be involved in the tank. I think that's a good way to kind of indicate that's happening. And then otherwise, the tank is primarily responsible for their own survival. That is, for me, when the game is fun. And it does still involve all three roles being important, right? Like, healers are important in that spot. But the crucial thing there is that the healers need to be necessary for the DPS player's survival, which is something that is not true right now in the game. And Blizzard was like, yeah, we don't think we have time to change that before War Within. They said that like a month ago, but I guess they have time to change it for tanks. Tank durability can cause some other problems as well, especially in challenging endgame content that we want to work towards improving. Enemy damage is increased to challenge tanks, but if it's increased too much, it gets spiky and puts tank in significant danger if their defenses ever drop. This can lead to tanks getting killed rapidly, seeming out of nowhere. We feel this is unsatisfying and would prefer tank damage to generally be evenly distributed, but still threatening over time. So this is a good take here, which is that tanks should ideally be getting less one-shot and more dying in a predictable fashion. That is a good goal. Now, this strikes me as something that all of the notes that they are then going to put are going to make this less true rather than more true, but this is a good mission statement for sure. If tanks are not threatened enough, then the most challenging part of endgame content can become keeping DPS and healers alive, often against high burst damage. Making tank survival a more involving element of group gameplay could give us some freedom to ease up on the threat to other group members. I mean, I think it's absolutely mandatory I've been doing keys on beta, and if you're doing a key on beta as the tank player, you already feel like you are dying over a longer period of time than on Dragonflight, and it also feels like you are more reliant on the healer than in Dragonflight. And crucially, you are aware that if your group is low and your group is taking rot damage, you are in tremendous danger because your healer is busy, right? And so, yeah, if they want to do any of this stuff, this is not only could give us some freedom, it's absolutely imperative that the group is not dying if the tank is dying, so that the tank can actually get healed. Again, I find this to be misguided. I think this should be the other way around. I think that the tanks should be like, if the tank is low and the rest of the group is low and there's rot damage coming out, the tank should be able to press some stuff to survive, and the healer should know that they should focus on the DPS players rather than the other way around. And yeah, against high burst damage, again, this is a relic or a side effect of the defensive power of all the DPS specs, which is something that I think is the real underlying problem for why healers feel unnecessary rather than tank stuff. Because I don't know very many healers that enjoy tank healing as opposed to like group healing, as opposed to healing. You still got to do spot healing, right, on people in the group that are being targeted by stuff. But that for me, at least when I'm healing, if I'm doing a key and the tank is the only person taking damage, like you can go play classic if you want that kind of healing pattern, right? And I don't know. I think it's worse by a lot. To address the above, we're making reductions to tank durability and self-healing. This will allow us to smooth out damage tanks and parties take while retaining the challenge of keeping them alive over time. We'll take those changes into account in encounter tuning as well. Yeah, I mean, I guess best case scenario is that this sentence is true. Realistic case scenario is this sentence is going to be true in some cases, but in many cases it's going to get worse. And in many cases, the way that the tank is going to solve this is by kiting. So if you are a tank player that enjoys kiting, I think this is going to really increase the amount of times that it's correct for you to kite. And there is certainly a degree of skill expression in kiting. It's something that, a good player can do really well with. There's a lot of like micro kiting that you can do as well, where you're kind of keeping the pack in one general space, but minimizing the amount of autos that land on you, which is also something that is going to be valuable with this. I don't know very many tank players that enjoy that. I don't know very many people that pick up the old sword and shield with the intention of not getting hit and just kind of backpedaling away from stuff. I think that is a really fundamental misunderstanding of why tanking is fun, and I think it's going to lead to a tremendous reduction in the amount of people queuing as tank. And I think that's going to be bad for everybody because you need a tank to play the game, and there are going to be a lot more groups without them. But let's continue. Tanks will take more damage overall, but shouldn't die significantly more often. To increase the overall damage tanks take and their reliance on healers, we're primarily increasing the percentage of damage they take after mitigation from steady damage sources like physical attacks. Note that we are increasing the danger of the stuff you can kite. So if you're listening carefully again, you are going to kite more often. Kiting is going to be, if you played Shadowlands Season 1, that's what they are designing towards here, which is, again, horrendous error. I could not overstate how bad that is. We're making fewer reductions to each class's defense against burst damage or other threats that are currently most likely to be lethal with them. Encounters will be tuned with this in mind, so the character of tank damage changes, but the lethality of it doesn't significantly increase. So, again, this part, if you actually read the patch notes that they're going to do, it's one of those things where they've said it, but it's not a true statement. Haters would call it a lie. The nerfs to tank defensiveness and DRs and stuff will apply to the damage against burst damage as well. But I guess they could say it even without it being true. There's no fact check that goes on here, I guess, except for this video. Tank damage intake should be steady and not too fast. One of our goals for these changes is to smooth out the rates tanks take damage to reduce surprise spiky deaths. Healers should have time to respond to tank health, and tanks should have time to use self-heals, like Word of Glory or Celestial Brew. For some classes, we're increasing their passive defenses To compensate for defense or for decreases to more active or reactive defensive mechanics, tank busters will still create challenging moments that reward tanks for planning and smart use of cooldowns. I think this is a good goal here. I think this is a good part of this. And yeah, I think this is probably the only part of this post that makes any sense. Tanks will have strong answers to threats or periods of danger, but less sustained self-healing. Tanks should have autonomy over their own survival and will still have cooldowns or emergency self-heals like Renewal or Impending Victory, but the healing of continuous effects like Elune's Favored or Indomitable are reduced, so tanks must have more of a partnership with healers to restore their missing health once it's lost. Again, this is sort of a understandable goal. I would say, here's the thing, is I already felt like this was the case on live or on beta. I was doing keys where it's like, okay, I'm never getting topped. Like, I'm relying on my healer, and I'm just trying to stay alive for long enough for my healer to get me. And that's like if, the start of an expansion is a natural time for things to feel like that, right? The start of the expansion is when you're at the weakest, and then you become more powerful over the course of an expansion. But I will say that it already felt like an especially weak start of expansion time, at least for the keys that I was doing, which is only like 10s, 12s, but 12s are pretty nasty on beta. Like, that's where the affix goes away and you get the extra scaling. And I was getting beat up, and oftentimes it was a case of like, I'm using Impending Victory to survive an extra global in the hopes of then getting healed by my healer, right? And like, that is a fun way to tank, but them moving more in that direction when it already feels that way on beta means that instead, that's not going to be how we're going to play, and instead we're going to be kiting. Healer gameplay should not be dominated by tank healing. So, okay, there's another paragraph here that's going to make sense. Healers play a critical role. Keeping tanks alive is part of what they bring to the table. However, healers contribute to the group of success in many ways, especially in dungeons. They sustain, dispel, and respond to burst damage, all while doing mechanics. Tank healing should not demand so much that it interferes with their other roles. It may take some iteration to get the balance right on this, where healers feel essential to tank survival, but with their attention not overly demanded by it. Yeah, I mean, I think that if your healer is mostly doing tank healing, it's a huge failure for... that is going to nuke the enjoyment of both the healers and the tank players, and nuke the participation rates on both of those roles. So I guess maybe it's possible to simultaneously have healers feel essential to tank survival without their attention being overly demanded by it, and then it'll only nuke the tank's enjoyment and not the healer's enjoyment, which would be better than nuking both. But it still strikes me as a level of balance that would be very, very, very hard to achieve. And in particular, with the way that Dragonflight worked out, it strikes me as the level of balance where it seems unlikely that there will be enough interest in doing the work to get that level of balance once we get to War Within Season 3 and 4, because clearly Dragonflight Season 3 and 4 stopped getting anywhere close to the amount of effort that this sort of goal would require. Tank gameplay should not significantly change or require actions like kiting to survive. Okay, yeah, I mean, I agree that this is true. We're happy more players are enjoying playing tanks with their friends than in pickup groups. There are a lot of demands on tanks, such as learning routes, leading groups, and knowing what trash abilities are particularly dangerous. The gameplay of standing toe-to-toe with groups of enemies and tactics you've learned to survive should continue to be effective. I mean, this is a good statement. All of this is saying that this is not going to be true, and all the patch notes are saying this is not going to be true. But I'm glad that Blizzard at least is saying that they don't. Blizzard is basically, they're just putting in like 40 changes that say it's time to kite, and then they've got a little line here that's like, you shouldn't have to kite. It's like, okay, well, I'm glad you think that, but I'm busy kiting. I can't talk right now. I can't come to the phone. If I walk near it, I'm getting autoed and I'm getting killed. So your feedback, please. We're excited for you to get a hold of these changes and share your feedback on playing with them. Yeah, I mean, I will of course play with these as well, and I've sounded very negative about these changes so far. I try not to do that too much before playing with things, but I can't help just an overwhelming feeling that this is moving in the exact wrong direction. But I will play with it and potentially make another video once I have about how this has affected my tanking thing. The thing is, I'm alright. Like in raid tanking, it's probably going to be fine. It's just mostly key tanking. But at the end of the day, if key tanking really sucks, I just won't play key tanking and I'll just raid tank, and that's fine. There are seasons where I've already done that, so it's not the end of the world, I guess, but it's pretty bad. Keys are fun, and it's a shame that they're making them not fun. Okay, so class updates. In War Within, all character stamina has been increased by 60%, As part of an overall adjustment to the pace of healing gameplay, this increases the relative value of abilities that heal a percentage of a character's max HP. Many of these ability changes are to counteract that relative change. For instance, percent healing that Frenzied Regen restores has been reduced by about a third, but the amount of health it restores has remained the same. This is a good change. This is fine. This makes sense, right? Like, I think that giving the characters an extra part of stamina, right? Like, you kind of just increase the sponge, the size of the healing sponge, and then make percent healing becomes stronger as a result of doing that, and it makes sense to nerf it down to compensate. I think that this is entirely logical here. Blood Decay. Death Strike is a powerful ability that allows blood decays to mitigate a percentage of any form of damage taken in the last 5 seconds. In a way, it works like a retroactive shield block. Instead of reducing damage up front, it mitigates the damage you took from a hit by healing you. If used in succession, Death Strike can affect a single hit multiple times, which would be comparable to blocking a hit, then going back in time and blocking it again. In some cases, restoring yourself to a higher health than where you started. In War Within, we're changing it to only heal the decay for a percentage of damage taken from a given damage event once to make it scale more like other tank mitigation mechanics. Now, I've been very negative so far in this video. This strikes me as a really smart change. I think that Blood Decay, so I love Blood Decay. Blood Decay is really fun. It's certainly true that when Blood Decay is broken, it's because you get to these spots where you're taking 100% of your health and damage every 3 seconds, but you're death striking every 1 second, and that death strike is looking back at 250% of your damage of your health and damage being taken over the last 5 seconds, and it's just topping you, right? And that you get to this spot where you just are completely invincible. And this seems like a really good fundamental way of fixing this. Now, where I disagree with what Blizzard are doing here is that I would probably buff the percentage that it's doing and make it only apply to each hit once, right? Like I would make it heal for more, but then each hit once. And then you have this gameplay where it's like, okay, when am I going to use this Death Strike that's looking back at this damage taken recently? And I'd maybe even increase it beyond the last 5 seconds, maybe to like 7 or something like that. And also potentially, you slow down the runic power growth and you make it so that when to Death Strike becomes a really tactical decision. I think that would be a really cool way to take this spec. And I think that it would go a long way towards solving kind of one of the fundamental problems that Blood Decay has, where it's sort of very hard for Blood Decay to be good but not broken. And it's much easier for it to either be broken or terrible. And I think that this is actually a really, really good step towards making it possible to land in the good spot. We're also reducing RP gens somewhat, and reducing some of the mitigation that DKs get from high uptime cooldowns, like Enfeeble and Rune Weapon, but increasing armor from Bone Shield. Overall, Death Knight should take damage more smoothly, and they will remain one of the strongest tanks for encounters with high magic and periodic damage, which does make sense. I mean, the fact that you're no longer going to be able to heal for multiple... healed from periodic damage multiple times in your Death Strikes is certainly going to nerf DKs in that spot, but I suspect that they will still feel pretty good there. And increasing the spec's armor is one of the strongest ways to buff it. This is a spec that really likes armor, like a lot. So Death Strike can now only heal DKs once, like for each damage taken once. A new aura, Coagulating Blood, shows the amount of recently taken damage that will be used. The aura description lists the value as a flat amount, and the number of stacks shows it as a percentage of your current health. Great. I think that this should be on your personal resource display as well, probably. And then that would go a long way towards making it so people don't need weak auras to show themselves how much they're going to get healed by their Death Strike. Fantastic. Blood Shield's cap is now 50% of the DK's maximum health, was 100, and the cap is no longer temporarily increased by Vamp Blood. This should not affect how much Blood Shield Death Knights are able to generate while actively tanking, but it'll reduce how large a barrier they're able to accumulate while off tanking. This makes sense. It's also a nerf to Mastery as well, but which is maybe unfortunate. Maybe this cap should scale with Mastery somewhat. That would probably make sense. So that stat is not super hurt by this change, but I think this is probably fair. I mean, it's definitely true that as a Blood Decay, sometimes you just come in with a full Blood Shield when you shouldn't really have one. Or when, I guess making that a little bit weaker probably does make some sense. Rune of the Fallen Crusader now heals 4% of your max HP with 6. Fine with that. That's, percent health. Get that a little bit weaker. Rune of the Fallen Crusader getting nerfed, also fine by me. Runic Attenuation generates less RP. Enfeeble reduces damage dealt to you by less. Null Magic reduces damage taken to you by less. Bone Shield gives you 100% strength armor instead. Leeching Strike heals for half as much. Dancing Rune Weapon increases parry by less. Each active Rune Weapon generates less RP from Heart Strikes. Everlasting Bond gives you less uptime on Rune Weapon. Blood Drinker reduces the damage the enemy deals to you by 15, was 20, and Bone Storm heals by less, but deals more damage. So I think overall, Blood Decay here, Like, this is a very sizable nerf. I think that it could do with some compensation buff to this. Like, buffing the percentage of damage taken, making up for the fact that it's now only going to apply to each hit once, would be what I would want to do here, but I guess that would go against the philosophy here that they're going for. But, like, to me, that's kind of the only thing that's bad in here. The rest of this all makes sense to me for Blood Decay, and I think is good. And, yeah, you know, an extra 25% value on Bone Shield is pretty big. Vengeance. Like Deathstrike for Vengeance, Soul Fragments give DHs strong recovery against any type of damage, as well as strong self-healing. Because DHs consume them steadily, we're not changing the rules for how often they can affect a damage event. We're increasing their overall damage taken by weakening the DR of talents like Void Reaver and Illuminated Sigils, while keeping the power of core abilities like Soul Fragments and Demon Spikes. They will continue to be one of the stronger tank classes at self-healing and surviving magic damage. Live by the Glaive, which is just a heal when you parry, restores less max HP. Again, all these things that are percent max HP healing getting nerfed, I think does make sense. Like, this part of this set of changes, fine by me. Thick Skin, so you're getting less baseline stamina, less baseline DR from demonic wards. Soul Cleave is going to do less healing. Frailty heals for less. Void Reaver heals for less. Illuminated Sigils gives less parry. Down in Flames gives you less cooldown reduction on Firebrand. Meta gives less max HP, and Dark Glare Boon will give you less Fel Dev value. Of these, I feel like the Soul Cleave healing reduction, the Frailty healing reduction, these sorts of things. I mean, I guess these are the kind of things that scale. The Frailty healing is like with number of targets. Yeah, Illuminated Sigil's getting another nerf here as well. It's also not something I'm a huge fan of. Meta giving less max HP is fine. You're still going to be indestructible in meta. Baseline stamina reduction I don't like for Vengeance. I feel like Vengeance already felt really squishy on beta as well, so further squishing them seems bad. Yeah. Dark Glare, I guess Dark Glare Boon getting nerfed. I don't know. Like, I think you're still going to want to talent this, which is going to feel kind of bad. Let's move on to Guardian Druid. With high armor and Iron for uptime, Druid should be one of the best tanks at surviving physical damage. We're slightly increasing the damage they take from all types of damage and balancing the power of their self-healing. We're also reducing the durations of some of their cooldowns to make timing their use more important. I guess before we talk about Guardian Druid, I just want to say for Vengeance Demon Hunter is going to be benefiting from these changes because they're really good at kiting. So compared to Blood Decay can't really kite as effectively. Vengeance, all of these nerfs kind of don't matter as much for them because they have Infernal Strike, so they could just leap away. If you remember Shadowlands Season 1, Vengeance was pretty squishy, but they had Infernal Strike, so they could just leap away. So I suspect that Vengeance is actually that's even with these nerfs, they're probably a winner in these changes because they are so effective at kiting. Compared to, say, Bears, who can't. Frenzied Regen heals for 20% of your max HP. So, in general, I'm in favor of the max HP self-healing nerfs. Frenzied Regen in particular, I think, is one that should not have gotten nerfed. This already felt like it was a fair amount of healing, if a little bit on the low side, particularly given the fact that it's on the GCD, and so it's competing with doing other stuff to help you stay alive. I think that this is a really bad change to go in here. Despite the fact that I'm in general in favor of nerfing percent HP things, I think Frenzied Regen in particular is wrong-headed to do this too. Iron Fur gives less armor, which actually this doesn't really matter much at all. Iron Fur, very easily you can get to a point where you're experiencing tremendous diminishing returns on your armor, even in the first patch of the expansion. So this is going to nerf your survivability at like 1 stack of Iron Fur noticeably, 2 stacks of Iron Fur a little bit, 3 or more stacks of Iron Fur, it's probably not even going to feel like anything. Renewal heals for 20% of max HP was 30%. This one I'm fine with. That's okay. Reinvigoration gives less cooldown reduction on Frenzied Regen. Oof, God. I don't like that. I already felt like you couldn't press Frenzied Regen very often. Earth Warden, less damage. Survival of the Fittest reduces cooldowns by less. Tooth and Claw, less. After the Wildfire triggers less often. This is a good change. After the Wildfire is OP, I would have preferred to make this heal for a lot less rather than make it trigger less often, because it's still a huge burst of healing when it does trigger. And this is group healing, right? After the Wildfire is a big burst of group healing. This is the kind of thing that I think would actually make sense to target like aggressively if they wanted to nerf Guardian. Ursulak's Fury grants a shield equal to less of 25% of Thrash and Maul damage was 45. Elune's Favorite heals you for almost half as much as it used to. Rage of the Sleeper lasts for 8 instead of 10. Damage reduction is 20 instead of 25. Leech down to 20 from 25. Pulverize is getting nerfed. That one seems wrong to me as well. This was already very, very fiddly, very costly to use. Ursock's Guidance also gives less cooldown reduction on Incarn as well. So some good changes here for Guardian. I think reducing the Elun's Favored healing definitely makes sense in the world of Lunar Bear. It's a bit of a weird talent because like now you never take this if you weren't playing Lunar Bear, but if you are playing Lunar Bear, it's still probably going to do a lot of healing. That's one of those things with hero talents is that if there's talents that interact with one hero talent tree, they kind of have to be balanced for that hero talent tree. And then now the talent trees are just full of some of these nodes where it's like, oh, I would never consider this if I'm playing the other hero talent tree, right? So I don't know if there's an answer to that. Maybe you could have this do a different percent based on whether you're playing a Druid of the Claw or Loon's Chosen. But yeah, okay, Brewmaster. Healers have more time to heal monks than other tanks because stagger spreads out the damage they take over time. This is true in theory, although depending on the version of the game, that's not always actually been true. Sometimes Brewmasters die just as fast as everybody else. Our goal is for monks to take a little more damage overall than other tanks to offset this effect. Totally fair. However, we feel their overall magic damage mitigation is a little low compared to other tanks and are improving it somewhat by buffing stagger and its value against magic. To increase Fizz taken overall, we're primarily reducing the dodge granted by Elusive Brawler and some of their other talents. This is probably the mission statement of the tanks. This is probably the one that I agree with the most. This is, I think, a good way of affecting Brewmaster in general. So Brewmaster's balance increases Monk's armor by 50%, was 25%. Great. Elusive Brawler is getting nerfed, which this is in particular a nerf to like single target physical damage taken. Elusive Brawler is good in AoE because it just consistently triggers, but in single target, you generate more stacks of it relative to incoming attacks than you do on AoE. So it's really strong for making it so that you don't take very many auto attacks from bosses. And I think nerfing this makes sense. I think that that's an area that does make some sense. And then buffing their maybe baseline dodge against, crowds of mobs could make more sense as well. Or giving them some way of, some extra juice against, 5 targets attacking you at the same time, which is often an area where Brewmasters are in a lot of danger. Again, Brewmasters can kite pretty effectively, which I suspect is going to be the meta going forward. So they're a tank that is sort of naturally happy about tanks getting nerfed because you can run away, Ring of Peace, and keep living and just ignore all the other stuff. Celestial Fortune heals you for less. This is the crit-based. Like, based on your crit, you have a chance of getting extra healing when you receive healing. This is one of those changes where it's like, so are we really trying to make tanks and healers a team? Because this is nerfing the teaming up with the healer part of the Brewmaster kit. Amount of damage staggered increased by 8%. Huge buff. Huge buff to Brewmaster here. This is one of those things that is difficult to overstate just how much, because they're already staggering a large percentage of incoming damage. Increasing that by 8% is actually a very big thing. Percentage of magic damage staggered increased to 58 was 45, so a huge increase in the amount of magic damage that gets staggered. Now instead of taking 55% of an incoming magic hit, you're taking 42%, which means your chance of getting one shot by magic damage has gone way down. Dance of the Wind, chance to dodge has been reduced to 5% for Brewmaster only. See, this is one of those things where it's like, Elusive Brawler getting nerfed, I think, is fine. Dance of the Wind getting nerfed, I don't think is fine. I think this is going to make the fortified trash pack situation much nastier. And so the answer is going to be Kite. Yu'lon's Grace gives less of an absorb shield by a lot. Wow, this is getting nerfed more than in half. This was a lot of HPS, so maybe it's fair. And again, this is a max HP based thing, so this is maybe fine. I feel like probably this part of the change doesn't need to be here. Just this would probably be enough, but this did do a lot of HPS and was also not particularly interesting, so this isn't one that I'll mourn. Healing Winds restores less max HP. Staggering Strikes healing reduced. Spirit of the Ox chance to summon a healing sphere reduced by 40%. Elixir Determination has been nerfed to 30%, was 50%, was 100% in the previous beta build as well. Or minimum of 8% of your max HP was 20%. I think the 50% was already enough of a nerf to this. Like, that was already a big nerf, and I don't know. I think this is going to take it from feeling good to feeling bad, which is a shame. Celestial Brew healing nerfed, and Pretense of Instability grants 10% dodge, was 15%. So yeah, I mean, Brewmaster, I would describe Brewmaster as probably a winner relative to the other tank specs here. This is a big hole in their defenses getting patched. This is very powerful as well. The other change, like this is also a big change, a big powerful change. The dodge stuff is definitely bad, but also Brewmaster can kite really effectively, so that is also it's just good news for Brewmasters when kiting becomes more important, which I know Blizzard says they don't want that to happen, but I'm pretty sure it will. Protection Paladin. Paladins have a balance of good defenses against both physical and magic. They can be in danger if they lose the defensive power of standing in consecration, or if the armor bonus from Shield of the Righteous drops, so we are not reducing any of their passive physical defenses like armor or block. Like Druids, they have high uptime on their defensive CDs, so we're pulling back some of their durations to make timing their use more important. We would like Paladins to have slightly more self-healing, so we're increasing the power of Word of Glory. Great. This, I think, was a very good change. Word of Glory felt like it was very low healing on beta builds, so really happy to see this. Shield of the Righteous gives less armor. The damage reduction while standing in Consecrate is reduced by 20%. I'm actually okay with these being where they target Paladin defenses. I think these are the kinds of things that, like, this isn't going to make you die outside your consecration more often, which is one of the more frustrating places to die for prot pallies, right? Like, it does happen. There are fights where you have to do it, and also there's just newer players that make that mistake more often, and that makes prot pally a pretty unforgiving tank. So nerfing specifically their damage while their defenses while Shield of the Righteous and Consecrate are up does help smooth that out a little bit. I would like to see this instead of paired with not nerfing the passive defenses. I would rather see this paired with buffing their passive defenses, because again, I disagree philosophically with making the tanks weaker, but I think that shifting the power from standing in Consecrate to the default kit is a good idea. Sanctified Plates no longer gives bonus armor to Shield of the Righteous. Improved Holy Shield gives you less spell block. Dusk and Dawn gives less DR. Word of Glory healing increased by 10%. So with Word of Glory healing, I actually think that it could get a much bigger healing buff that only applies if you're targeting yourself. Because I think what they should be worried about for Prot Pallies is off healing becoming out of control. And so Word of Glory, I think they should just give Prot Pally like a 50 or 100% multiplier on Word of Glory healing, only if it's targeting yourself. And if you're off healing, it should still be pretty weak. It shouldn't feel like a super strong off heal that you just spam and keep people alive. That's one of the things that leads to healers feeling useless, that leads to no healer comps working. But it should feel more powerful used on yourself, I think, than it currently does, and I don't think 10% is going to go enough towards that. Sentinel's duration is getting nerfed. Eye of Tears duration is getting nerfed, and Holy Power abilities reduce cooldowns by less as well on Righteous Protector. Okay, yeah, I mean, Sentinel, a very high uptime cooldown, nerfing that seems fine. Eye of Tear, I'm not sure that, like, 6 seconds is such a short time for one of these defensives. I'm not sure I would be targeting this one. Sentinel duration, again, I disagree with the fact that they're nerfing tanks, but I think that the parts of the Paladin kit that they've chosen to nerf, if you told me you had to nerf Paladin, I would probably do some similar nerfs to this. But obviously I don't think that I think it's a bad strategy, but good tactics here. Prot Warrior. Warriors are the strongest tank against physical damage, though they can be vulnerable to magic or periodic damage. In this round of changes, we're increasing their damage taken across the board by reducing the power of D-stance. Warriors also have some strong heals that scale with their max HP, like Indomitable and Impending Victory, so we're reducing the power of those abilities to compensate for the 60% increase to stamina. Pain and Gain heals for less, Impending Victory heals for 20 instead of 30, D-Stance gives 16% DR, was 20. Fight Through the Flames causes D-Stance to reduce magic damage you take by more, so this is a little bit of a compensation buff against magic damage at least. Into the Fray gives less haste. Punish reduces damage enemies deal to you by less. Enduring Alacrity is getting nerfed. This got buffed a couple months ago on live, actually, and it was a good buff. Now it's getting nerfed down to 8%. I mean, you already kind of didn't want to take this point even after they buffed it by a lot. I bet this will make it now something you just kind of, I guess maybe you'll still have to take it. I don't know. Again, we'll be kiting, so it doesn't matter. Indomitable increases max HP by 6% and heals you for 1% per 20 rage spent. It was 10 rage. This is fair. This was a lot of self-healing, a lot of passive self-healing. Like this, Impending Victory getting nerfed, I feel kind of similarly to Frenzied Regen, where I feel like these buttons are infrequently pressed and should heal you for a lot. But the other percent health stuff here I think is pretty fair. Defender's Aegis gives gives more shield wall cooldown reduction. Impenetrable Wall causes Shield Slam to generate additional rage and give more CDR on Shield Wall, so they're making this choice node better. They're buffing this choice node. These were already really strong nodes. But yeah, I guess Wall is going to be a lot of your defenses now. And Disrupting Shout cooldown is being nerfed back to 90 seconds. So they're kind of reverting some changes they made to buff Prot Warrior a little bit towards the end of Dragonflight with this change and this change here. Yeah, I mean, Disrupting Shout is really OP in a world where you can't stop mobs from casting by stunning them anymore, which is how it works in War Within. Disrupting Shout actually interrupted them and actually put their spells on CD. So Prot Warrior was the best tank at doing that because Illuminated Sigils got nerfed for Vengeance. Disrupting Shout was really, 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 really good. Now it's going to still be just really good. I disagree with making it so stuns don't stop mobs from casting again. But in that world, I suspect that Prot Warrior is still going to be one of the biggest winners of all of this. Passive damage taken increase is actually not that high. It's just the D-stance nerf. The self-healing is getting a little bit worse, but wall uptime is getting higher. Rage gen is getting a little bit better. And also, Prot Warrior is one of those tanks that can kite. Prot Warrior is a tank that can heroic leap away, that can walk away. And that is going to be really valuable, I believe. So I hope I'm wrong about that, but I suspect I am right. I mean, it shouldn't surprise you. Of course, people generally think they're going to be right. So these are the tank changes coming in War Within beta build this week. I originally said I was going to do patch notes in this video as well, but I see we're already over the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to move the patch notes to a different video, and, you know, that'll come out probably also today or maybe tomorrow. But for now, that is the tank news. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.